Welcome to the Boom Clap podcast, where culture and conviction collide. I'm Rita Rogers.
And I'm Cecily Dickey.
Today, we have a conversation that I know you guys are going to be really excited about because it's one of our most listened to episodes already is with this guest. Just the Inserts is with us today. Again, we talked to you almost exactly a year ago. Very, very excited for this. Before we get into that conversation, though, I want to remind you guys to please leave us a review. Those propel our podcast forward. It's a free way you can support our podcast and help bring us to new listeners. And we really appreciate it. If we wake up in the morning to a new 5-star review, it just boosts our day and makes us feel really great knowing that you guys are helping get our podcast to new listeners. The other thing I want to remind you of is we have great episodes that we've already had out in September again, and we have great episodes going forward. Be sure to tune in next week. We talked to Heidi Klessig about the brain death fallacy and organ donation. And if you enjoy this conversation, I know you're going to enjoy that one too, because it's a topic that's not discussed really ever. Outside of the medical community and outside of organ donation is really a beneficial thing. But what happens in that process, and is it ethical? Those are questions that need to be answered. We need to be having these conversations, and I think you guys will really appreciate it. Did you know during the coronavirus years, poison control centers saw a 20% jump in calls related to cleaning products? This is because of the bleach, all-purpose cleaners, antibacterial cleaners that people were using around their homes. And regardless of your fear during that time and your increase in cleaning, a lot of people just in general use these products around their home. And not only are they bad for you to potentially ingest, but they also are absorbing into your skin. Your skin is an organ. This is where Rasa Organics comes in. They have cleaning products with natural organic ingredients that you can pronounce, that you know what they are, and they are safe for you and your family to use. You can feel comfortable using them. They also have lotions and soaps and just a wide array of products that you can use in your home. I know our house has Rasa in basically every room now. So go to rocasaorganics.com and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 20% off your first order. Anyway, without further ado, let's get this conversation rolling. I don't know how to address you. Just the Inserts. That's not your name. We will be hearing all of that really soon. That's going to be coming out really soon. But it's not yet. And so we're going to just be referring to you as Just the Inserts on this podcast. So how are you? What's been going on since the last time we talked?
Hello. Hi. Well, I'm so glad to be back. Thank you so much for asking me to come back when I didn't even really know that was a thing that people went back to podcasts that they've already been on. But when you asked me, I was delighted. I was like, yes, absolutely. I will come back. I cannot tell you how many people have messaged me just from the person that has never even thought twice about a medical product to the nurse that broke down crying listening to our conversation. I have gotten everything in between on the spectrum of people giving me feedback from that last podcast. Wow. I myself have listened to it a few times, and I recently listened to it just a few weeks ago, and it was crazy to me how many times I was able to pull out foundational elements that I took from that podcast, from our discussion, and put it into the book. So you asked me what I've been up to. I just published my first book, and a lot of the things that I built were from fruits of that conversation. So I really appreciated that time that we got to talk. And I know I said this before, but I was really nervous about coming out and putting out my voice. And now I'm kind of nervous getting my face out there. But again, I feel like I'm in comfortable territory with both of you. So thank you again for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah. We're so excited to have you on. And really, I just want to hone in on the fact that you took some foundational things from the episode with us to put into the book. Sometimes so you're anonymous. And so all of this conversation is happening in your head with yourself. And sometimes I can attest to this with Cecily. I hear things going on in the world. I read about things and I have all these thoughts. And then all of a sudden I can spew them out to Cecily on Voxer. And then they come out a different way. I hear them a different way. I'm able to form my thoughts better after hearing a conversation back and forth with her. And I think that's what the podcast, like what we want to do here and what podcasts do. It's long form conversation that people aren't able to have on social media. And that's why I think it's so great that you're doing these podcast episodes so people can hear you and where you're coming from with just the inserts.
Definitely. And there were a few people that followed me and they said, you know, when I first started following you, I thought that you were super rigid and super looking down on people and very judgmental. And then I started listening to you and I started reading your stories and I realized you're complete opposite. And I don't say that to toot my own horn. I say that because that's something that I work very hard on, because most people that I come across that give me heat, I used to give that heat as well. So I understand where they're coming from. So I do like that I can connect a little bit more through people's ears and so soon through video as well.
For sure. I think maybe we should just start by talking about what it has felt like for you to be anonymous and how it feels now, knowing that soon you won't be so anonymous anymore. Like, what goes through your mind as you anticipate this change?
I'm like very nervous in the fact of the reason a large part, and we talked about this, that I stayed anonymous was for safety concerns. Back in the COVID craziness, I got death threats and a lot of like creepy messages. I actually haven't had any of those, praise God, in a while since then. So I do feel more comfortable coming out, but still, you still have that nervousness anytime that you put yourself on the internet. I'm sure both of you feel that sense too sometimes. But I'm excited. I'm very excited to be able to connect with people, just to have that more personal level. I think it's a benefit. At first, I was kind of nervous. I was like, well, what about the people in my life that don't know that I'm just the inserts? Yeah. What if they finally find out that I'm just the inserts? So I've kind of been like slowly exposing myself to people in my life. Like we just started MOPS, which is now Momco rebranded. And I told my table and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you did all of this. So I've kind of been slowly like letting them know. And then then your ego starts getting, you're like, well, what if people recognize me? And like, nobody's going to recognize me. Like, truly, I am such a small fish when it comes to the informed consent world. I really don't have like the presence that other people do. So I like have to temper down my ego when it comes to that. But if it happens, I'm going to be excited because then I can see people in person and then I can connect more in that way too.
It will happen
to you.
Oh.
It will.
Yeah.
Like it happens to us. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And you're a quote, bigger fish. You're a bigger fish than you think you are. But as you were describing like what it would be like telling this, I forget what's the new name for MOPS?
It's Momco.
Momco. As you're sitting there telling this table of people that have known you, that you have this whole other thing going on. That would be actually really cool to hear. Like I was just telling Rita the other day, like I love it when people that I know personally, friends or family members do something, like they invest their talent and their time and their skills into doing something that's really cool and like something that takes courage. And I get so excited when people do that. And I want to like help them use those skills and like go as far as they can. And so I'm just imagining if I was sitting at that table with you and you had been a friend of mine and you were telling me that you had this whole other thing going on in your life, I would just be like, what? That's so amazing. Like, I don't know, if I learned that about someone that I had been close with, that they had all this going on, I just think that would be the coolest thing ever.
That's great. Yeah, as most of them are like, when do you do this? When do you have the time to do this? Like, it's a lot of late nights.
I mean, we do stuff, but I still have that question for you to like, how do you do all this? Yeah. So,
by the grace of God, honestly.
Yeah. So tell us the title of your book so our listeners can find it.
It's called Well Considered, a handbook for making informed medical decisions. And anyone who has read the American Medical Association's definition of informed consent in their medical ethics website, it's a play on that definition. They say in order to have informed consent, you have to be able to ask questions to make a well-considered decision. And that's where well-considered came from. And I actually, last year, I think it was, I was thinking about potentially doing a podcast, and I was going to call it Well Considered. I ended up being super breathless during pregnancy. My torso is like super short, so I can't do any kind of interviews or anything when I'm pregnant because it just sounds breathy. So then I pulled that. I'm like, okay, well, if I can't use it for the podcast, I'll use it for the book. And I just love it. It turned out so great. It's so perfect. I don't know if you've seen the cover of it or not.
Love it. Love the cover.
And the way that worked out, I actually designed the cover myself at first, and it was horrible. No, I did not do that one.
Okay.
Wow.
Very
I
good.
did not do that. That my skills are not that good at all. And so I designed it myself, and I just did all of these different versions, and I hated all of them. And there was one, and it had like doves, and it was like a medical cross. And my husband's like, what's with the birds? Like, why do you have birds on there? And he keeps me humble. And so I was like, okay, I need some help. Like, I really need some help. So I hired a designer. She's just horrible. She's so bad. Like, it did not turn out how I wanted it to be. And then, so I was like, well, that's money wasted. And then I was on Instagram, and then Face Out Studios came across my feed, and they've done book designs since like the 90s. They're amazing. They've done so many different books for really amazing people. And I reached out to them. I was like, hey, I know I'm a small fish, but I would love to hire you to help me with my book. And they were wonderful. It worked out perfect. She came up, the designer that was assigned to me came up with the design. At first, I wasn't too sure about it, but the more that it sat with me, I just fell in love with it. And I'm so happy. I can't believe that
Awesome.
there's an actual book out there, and I can't wait for people to read it.
You know what?
I love it. I don't know what the meaning of the apple is to you, but to me, it brings to mind like apple a day keeps the doctor away saying, and I just love it.
So that was her inspiration. And then when I got it, I showed it to a few of my friends and family members, just asking their thoughts. I didn't say what I thought. And every single person responded with a different interpretation, from talking about the Garden of Eden, talking to about like, is the apple healthy because it was injected, but it has a Band-Aid because it was injected? Or was the apple already healthy and now it's injured because it has a Band-Aid and it's injected? Does the apple represent a person? Does it represent our healthcare system? It was just all these different varied responses. And I love that, because informed consent is so diverse for so many different people, because we all have different needs. And so I was totally 100% on board after I got all the responses.
And how amazing is it how things work out too? Like, if you hadn't been pregnant, maybe you would have started the podcast and you would not necessarily have had time to write a book or to come across this design studio that had this perfect concept for the cover. Like, I don't know, it's just amazing how things work out the way that they do.
100%. And most of the book was written while my daughter was a newborn. And I have said multiple times, I would not be able to write it right now with her, because she's constantly like reaching back and she wants to be into everything now. So it was actually perfect that I wrote most of it, one-handed while breastfeeding, because she was just there and she was a newborn and she slept most of the time. So it worked out great.
Oh my gosh.
Very cool.
As a mom of a 17-month-old boy, I can say like, why I just want to soak that newborn phase up. And I'm so protective of it. I'm like, I can't do anything else but stare at this baby, because I want to smell it and remember it and like feel it and just know forever. And then like every child, I look back and I'm like, why didn't I use my time more wisely?
They were in one place doing one of three things: pooping or eating or sleeping. Why didn't I take it? Yeah, I totally understand.
Oh man. Okay, so the last episode we did with you was very much like, it was deep. Don't get me wrong. It was deep and it was wonderful. I loved it. But it was more like, this is who I am. This is why I do this. And what you need to know. This time we're going to go a little bit deeper into the things that we discussed on the last episode. So we'll tag that one in the show notes so you guys can find it back if you haven't listened to that one yet. But this time we're going to go just a little bit deeper into more, I don't know, technical spaces, I would call it. I'm not sure how you would describe that. But the first thing I kind of want to talk about is the new childhood vaccine schedule, because it was just put out. And there's RSV on the ticket now, and COVID vaccines across the board, at least one in these intervals. So I don't know, and more mRNA products coming down the pike. So what do you think about that? Or how would you have people evaluate that?
So I get asked about RSV almost daily. And I think a lot of it has to do with it now being on the schedule. Last time we talked, they had just come on the market. And I had said that I'm not going to do a post on it until Section 6.2 post-marketing adverse reactions section is more populated. I checked it yesterday. There's only like hypersensitivity reactions has been reported, which there's more because of other products in that same class has more reactions listed. But as I was reading through it, one thing just blaringly jumped out to me. There is under the warning and precautions section, Beyfortus says that any baby with a significant bleeding disorder should be given with caution, including thrombocytopenia. And that reaction is listed as a known adverse reaction to the Hep B vaccines, both of the US licensed vaccines. Mm-hmm. And also, aren't we told with the vitamin K injection, do you see where I'm going here? So
exactly
it's like
where my mind went.
I read these, and I think this is something that's really important too. Like when you're making a decision about a product, to make sure that you also compare, you consider the other products that are administered around the same time that you're accepting this product, because there can be interactions. There can be things that lower the effectiveness of one product. A great example that I cited in the book was the typhoid vaccines that are used when you go to places like India, when you take anti-malaria drugs, because your anti-malaria drugs make your typhoid vaccine, according to the CDC and both manufacturers, ineffective. I think that's also important to take into the CDC schedule and realize, are these products given at the same time to a newborn baby, one, effective, and two, are they causing other issues? Like, would your child necessarily need the vitamin K injection if they didn't get the RSV or they didn't get the Hep B, because these are known to cause serious bleeding disorders? And is the vitamin K enough? Is that something that we need to consider more? A newborn baby, it's very hard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, to identify if there is a significant bleeding disorder, especially if they're like right when they're born. To me, it's like alarm signals. I want to say I'm shocked that it was passed, but I know, I talk about that in my book, why some of those products do get passed, even when there are things like SIDS listed as adverse reactions. So for me, if you are researching RSV, if you're researching COVID-19, don't just research that one product. Make sure you research all the other products that are administered at the same time. I personally, this is me personally speaking, think that the brakes on this train are broken and we are dangerously off the rails when it comes to products being administered to infants. And I think that there's too many things listed on inserts that are significant safety concerns. And again, this is me personally speaking. I do think that some of these products should be pulled off the market until they are studied further, that we have more information. I mean, this happens all the time with other products on the market. I wish that it was applicable to the vaccines or, just any product given to a baby. But again, like I say, and I say this all the time, if you, because informed consent, you are able to accept, delay, and decline. If you do accept that product, just be aware of the adverse reactions that could happen.
Yes. So I'm not sure, like I kind of was like, yes, and maybe I interrupted your thought, but the vitamin K shot, is given because babies supposedly have issues that could predispose them to bleeding. And so that's why we need to give that. But then at the same time, the RSV is cautioned with babies who have a risk of bleeding. So that's contradictory, really. Mm-hmm. And also, like you said, I want to reiterate, how do you know a brand new baby has a significant risk of bleeding or bleeding disorder the moment they're born? We don't. So the vitamin K shot, can we stay there for a second? You said in the last episode that they made vitamin K seem like it was just some vitamin. So what is vitamin K?
So it's a synthetic injection, and it's not just vitamin K. There are other ingredients, and I actually pulled out 2 of them in my book and highlighted them. One of them is benzyl alcohol, and then glacial acetic acid. So both of those are the benzyl alcohol can cause delayed dermatitis reactions. That's probably why exogenous reactions and delayed reactions for up to a year are potential adverse reactions on the vitamin K injection insert. And then glacial acetic acid has the potential to cause skin burns, permanent eye damage, and tissue destruction. And these are all cited from government resources, if in case anyone's not aware of anything that I do. Most of everything, I would say like 99.9% of what I post is from a .gov research. And I will always cite where I find this information because I don't want to replace your research. I want to streamline your research. So if you want to know where that is, I have it in my book, and I also have it on my website on my vitamin K webpage. So for me personally, especially for anyone that listened to my first interview, my daughter was injured by the vitamin K injection. And before it was given to me, or before I went into the hospital, I remember asking if there was a preservative-free version. I was assured that there would be. And then when I was there, the preservative-free was no longer an option. They didn't have it. And so I accepted it because I had a 44-hour labor. Again, I thought just vitamin K, no big deal. And then unfortunately I learned the hard way, but I think it is important to know too that it's synthetic. It's not, it's a science man-made product. It's not like you're going out and taking, a plant from the earth or something like that, and then you're ingesting it and you have the normal digestive tract or anything like that, like that's being injected into the bloodstream. And I think that's important also for parents to understand.
The vitamin K shot is very upsetting for me, to be honest. And I'm sure we talked about this in the first episode, how I wasn't told that my children even received it, but I know they did. Now I know they did, but I had no idea at the time that they did. Like, it wasn't even a conversation. There was literally no informed consent. They just went ahead and did it, which blows my mind. And I had sent Rita just via text before coming on here this little pamphlet that is put out by our health authority here in BC. And it's talking about, one page talks about medical care that infants receive. And the second page is talking about immunizations and like the immunization schedule. And it was really interesting to me that the vitamin K injection was put on the medical care page, which I've never seen this pamphlet up until I looked it up, however many years after my kids have already received the injection. And then, so it's put on that page, but then there's this whole other page that's about vaccines. So I feel like it really makes it seem like something it isn't. It just makes it seem like something as simple as like a Band-Aid, or, an alcohol swab. Like, this is just some little tiny piece of medical care, like that we're just doing, that's really innocuous and it's no big deal. And then the second page is like, and here's all about vaccines and the immunization schedule. When really that is on the schedule. That's the reason they receive it day one, because it's on the schedule. So that really upsets me. It really upsets me. And one of my kids, I am super suspicious that some of the issues that we've dealt with over the childhood have been perhaps because of the vitamin K shot. It just fits the picture. And there's no informed consent whatsoever.
Especially with, and we talked a little bit about this, or maybe it was on a different podcast that I talked about, that with the vitamin K, it isn't just something that is injected and then your body absorbs it and then it's gone. It's something that half of it is stored in the liver, and there's a delayed release for 2 to 3 months after it's injected. So for some babies, the delayed exogenous reactions don't happen until later. So here you have, especially for new parents, a perfectly healthy child, and then they go home, they are in the newborn phase, and all of a sudden eczema starts presenting. If I was a parent that hadn't already been kind of questioning things, I would never associate this eczema reaction to something that was administered at birth. It would never even cross my mind.
Especially if you didn't know it was administered.
Exactly, 100%. So for me, that's another part that's important for informed consent and eliminating diagnostic confusion. If you read about the vitamin K injection and you read on the insert that there could be a delayed reaction up to a year, that's what the manufacturer says, then you can be aware of that. And then you can say, okay, if it's stored into the liver, maybe there's something wrong with liver. Maybe that's something that you can look at with your pediatrician or with your doctor, at least to have those insights. I mean, and this is what I said last time, the government knows, the manufacturer knows, but the parents don't know. And so they're the ones that are left holding the bag. They're the ones spending thousands of dollars on tallow creams and all these other things trying to fix their kids' eczema. But here, they don't even realize what caused it. And it's hard to treat something when you don't know what the root cause is. Mm-hmm. And so again, like I have personal feelings about certain products, but even if someone accepts that product, I still want them to be informed because I want them to know all of that information. It's all there. It's free to access. So why not use it?
Yeah. And what really also concerns me is, like you said, it's stored in the liver, right? But what newborns' brand new organs are created to have to process all of that synthetic material right away? Like, so not only is it stored there, but there's a very good chance. And again, my personal opinion, I just can't wrap my head around how a brand new liver and a perfect little baby is supposed to handle all of that right away, because from the beginning of humanity, they've been processing breast milk at the very beginning. That's it. And then whatever's coming at them environmentally, which they're inhaling or touching, which they're not touching much when they're newborns, they're touching their mom, their dad, like that's a lot to congest the liver in the very first day of their life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, I know we didn't talk about it, but like the vitamin D supplements that are given to supplement vitamin D, that has soybean oil in it and food dyes. And so maybe what we're trying to grasp here is like, maybe just don't call it vitamin D or vitamin K, because it's kind of almost misleading to parents, because they think, oh, I'm going to fill out this prescription for vitamin D, but it has all these extra things in it that people don't know about. And maybe if they called it something else other than vitamin K, maybe parents would research it more. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we do all these things to newborns, like vitamin K, for example. And there might be a reason, as a Christian, like God made us, and there might be a reason that our clotting factors don't work the same at the beginning, because there might be something that's happening in that process that we're inhibiting, trying to save a few babies, that do have an issue, but you can't tell necessarily who those babies are right away. And what if we're hindering and harming all the children in the process?
Absolutely.
Like this is how my brain works on this stuff. And it's like, this is why you need to be able to personally make the choice, because you have to personally live with the consequences, right? So
great point.
And also too, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it actually makes me think of like the fontanelles on a baby's head, right? Like if we were to like take an x-ray of a brand new baby before we knew about this, we would think, oh my goodness, something's seriously wrong with this baby's skull, without realizing that actually God made it that way so that it could pass through the birth canal and so that its brain could grow, and to suppress that natural ability, that thing that God put in there for their well-being, would actually kill them. Their brain wouldn't be able to grow, or they wouldn't be able to come out of mom. Like God did that for a very specific reason. Rita, that's such a good point. Like we're just, I don't know, we do a lot of messing around that maybe we should do.
And I think too, if anyone's seriously talking and considering or is fearful of excessive bleeding, the first thing that you should be researching is delayed cord clamping, or at least waiting until the cord stops pulsing. That should be number one change right off the bat. I mean, I've talked with so many nurses, so many midwives, and they all say that it's to help with protocol. It's to help the provider, not the patient. And so if that's truly something that a practitioner is worried about, that should be step number one, because you don't need a product for that. That's just having patience. There's nothing extra that is required other than just being a little bit patient to let that cord stop pulsing, and that for the baby to get all of that blood from the cord, because there's actually quite a bit when you consider how small a baby is and how much blood is in the cord. That's a significant amount of blood that you want that baby to have.
Absolutely. Okay,
sticking along the line of products being given, and problems that can arise. Let's talk about SIDS a little bit and the stats on SIDS being with, most cases being within X number of days of a baby having a vaccine. Some people might chalk this up to coincidence because they'll say like, well, only babies die of SIDS and they're getting vaccines during this time frame. So it's not necessarily a causation. What would you say to that? And what do you think about that?
Well, first off, if it's enough for a manufacturer to put as an adverse reaction on DTaP, that's pretty significant in my eyes. And in order, according to the FDA, in order for an adverse reaction to be added to the post-marketing section, it needs to be have some causation there. Even if you look at the definition of an adverse reaction, the CDC says that it's been caused. That reaction is known to be caused by. So just pulling the definitions from the CDC and FDA and then seeing sudden infant death syndrome listed as a potential adverse reaction to a product that it's administered to for 6-month-old babies, there's a lot of mental gymnastics to say that that's not correlated. Just looking at the facts. And honestly, DTaP is a huge product that when I was speaking earlier and saying that I do think that there are products that need to be pulled from the market until they're researched for safety concerns. That's the main one right there. If you have babies dying of SIDS and the manufacturer has it on the insert, I'm shocked that it's still in the market. And I'm honestly shocked that there aren't riots of parents.
People would say, that, well, they're going to put everything on there because they need to cover their bases, but they really don't need to cover any bases, right?
No.
Not liable.
Right, exactly. And I actually recently, and I think you saw this on Instagram, there was a someone in the medical community that said,
yeah, I got it here. Let's play it.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
She messaged me, so I feel like it's fair game.
I think that this account does a lot of harm and is very fear-mongering under the guise of informed consent and providing information, because information without context is misleading. And that's exactly what it is. And so inserts really serve as legal documents to kind of cover their bases on anything that could happen, any side effects that could happen, not things that do happen, not things that often happen, not even things that sometimes happen, things that could happen. Now imagine in normal life, in our everyday life, if that happened anywhere else. If you go to the car dealership to buy a new car and it comes with an insert of everything that could happen to you while driving that car. Or you eat an avocado and it comes with an insert of everything that could happen. There's people who are very allergic to avocados. It could cause anaphylaxis. That will come on the insert. If you drank a glass of water and it came with an insert of everything that could happen, headaches, coma, seizures, death from drowning or hyponatremia, all of that would come while you're drinking your water. That's essentially what we're working with here. Not things that actually do happen.
The last part was my favorite when she said, we're not working with things that could happen, we're things that do happen or something along those lines. So she kind of like acknowledged that they do happen. So that example, I would caution anyone from using the logic of that it's a legal reason why they're on there. And that's because of the National Childhood Vaccination Act of 1986 that gave immunity to manufacturers that they are not legally responsible for serious adverse reactions or injuries or deaths caused by their products. So right off the bat, that tells me that she doesn't really understand that part of the pharmaceutical industry, that they do not have liability for their products. Second, inserts were made to be read. There's a reason why they're on the FDA website. It's a reason why they're accessible. Any pharmaceutical product that has gone through the FDA has to have a manufacturer insert, and every over-the-counter product may not have a manufacturer insert, but there's insert-like information that is available through NIH or through the CDC. And so for me, when I hear that argument, it's so silly in my mind, because if there's any known adverse reaction to a product, you need to know about it. And honestly, I know she said this as a way that it'd be silly to have a manufacturer insert for avocados, but I would love that. I would love to know from seed to shelf what has been exposed to this avocado before I eat it, because that's going to affect my body. I could have issues if I accept an avocado. I actually agree that we should have that, but that's a different discussion for a different reason. Now, I have gotten messages from people that say that they were fearful after reading a post of mine, but not fearful of the sense that I was fear-mongering them, but fearful because they accepted a product that they didn't know caused adverse reactions. That's what they were fearful for. Or this might be controversial, but after, I believe it was last year when there was a school shooting at that Christian school, the shooter was on hormone medication. And I got messages from people that were also on hormone medication, and they were scared that they too were experiencing some of adverse reactions of manic depression, aggressiveness, things like that. And so they asked me to research some of the products, and I did. And lo and behold, there were manic depression, aggressiveness, anxiety, hallucinations. All of these things are listed on the inserts, and she had no clue. No clue that was something that could be caused. So to me, I see it from the other end. People are fearful because they're not being told what the government and manufacturers know.
Well, and in my mind, I don't think what you said is controversial at all. It may be controversial because people don't want to recognize it, but the pharmaceutical industry, in my opinion, is absolutely partially responsible, or the people taking the products, the doctors prescribing without telling, all of that is responsible for some of what we're seeing within the mental health, if you want to call it that, spiritual health, whatever, of our youth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So, it is. It's really, it's heartbreaking to me, because sometimes when I receive these messages and I send them the inserts and I, share my free training course, and they come back to me a few weeks later and they're so mad, but they're not mad at me. They're just mad that they weren't told.
Of course. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much just in my own personal history that I had no clue about, and it does make me angry. But when I think about being someone in pharmaceuticals who absolutely knows all of this, someone who puts together the inserts and the information, and to just continue going ahead doing it, knowing that most of this is kept from the public, knowing that there are people experiencing these horrible and life-altering side effects, and then just like sleeping at night. And I totally 100% realize how judgmental that sounds. And I don't like that. Like, I feel bad about that. But at the same time, that is a very serious reality. It's a very serious reality to have to live with that. And well, you'll hear next week in an episode that we're doing about this brain death fallacy, that there's doctors that have to reckon with that too, right? And it's so, to me, it shows such a depth of character when people are willing to reckon with that, when their livelihood is tied to it or their relationships are tied to it, but they're still willing to hold up that microscope and be like, is this right? Mm-hmm. Like, that is an ultimate test of character. And what you do with that really matters.
Mm-hmm. Nurses and everybody, that conversation we had, Cecily, I had texted, I'm just going to say this now, but I had texted to a friend, that website, who was an ICU nurse friend. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe, and she just spent a little time on the website. Like, I cannot believe I didn't ever see this. So there is something to be able to receive information and see things a different way. And that's really what you're doing with just the inserts. But staying on the line of like mental health and pharmaceuticals, when we lost our son, our baby, like, I was pregnant. So for those of you who don't know that are just listening, I was 20 weeks pregnant. So it wasn't, he hadn't been born yet, but I was 20 weeks. We lost our baby. And going to those postpartum doctor's appointments, they give you this depression screening. And it's like, are you crying more than usual? Well, of course, I'm crying all the time. And that's an absolutely valid and normal response. And don't make me feel bad for having that response. And, they immediately offer you like, well, if you need anything for it, we can write you a prescription for antidepressant. And I'm like, I'm not depressed. I'm sad.
Grieving.
And there's, quote, depression that goes along with this, but this is a human response. Our society constantly trying to blunt normal human response is a major issue. And they act like emotions or having some kind of normal emotional response is a problem and potentially harmful. But these medications are completely safe. And that's just insane to me.
I was listening to the founder of Just Ingredients. She shared her story with depression. And she shared that, I can't remember how long she was on. I want to say it was like 5 years at least. She was on antidepressants for a very long time. She was no longer suicidal, but she had zero emotions. She didn't feel sad. She didn't feel happy. She didn't feel angry. She just was like on autopilot, didn't have any emotions. And then when she slowly started to address her diet and her nutrition and her sleep and her exercise, she started to wean off of antidepressants. And she still remembers, and this stuck with me. And I actually remember I was cleaning out my pantry when I was listening to this, and I still remember exactly what I was looking at when she said this, because it was so pivotal when she said this. She remembers her son made her laugh, and it was the first time that she had laughed in years. And to me, I laugh all the time. I can't imagine not laughing. I can't imagine that not being a part of my life, because laughter is there's so many biological events that happen in your body when you laugh. Yep. And for you to go years without laughing, yes, you're not suicidal, but are you living? What is the trade-off for that? And then also how it affects a lot of the pharmaceuticals. People don't understand how it actually works. Like, what are the mechanics of action? How does it actually make you stop doing a certain thing? Once you understand, like, for example, anti-inflammatories, it just shuts off your ability to experience pain. It's not fixing what's causing pain. It's just you're putting on that Band-Aid. And so some of the conversations that I have with people is really just kind of explaining how the biology works and how the drug works, so then you can understand. And that's a big reason why I added an element to that into the book, because in order for you to have informed consent, in order for you to understand how a drug is going to potentially affect your body, you need to understand your body and you need to understand how it works. And if you have a diagnosis, you need to understand what is everything around that diagnosis. What is this, your cardiovascular system? Or the example that I actually give is erectile dysfunction. And because that is such a great example, because erectile dysfunction can be caused by so many things. It could be caused by issues with blood circulation. It could be caused by hormonal issues. It could be caused by like sensitivity, nerve pain, nerve damage. So there's so many different things that can cause that. If you don't know what the root cause is, you're not going to fix anything. You need to address that first.
Yeah. Well,
and you could be potentially causing more harm by not addressing that root cause. And you're just taking a drug to fix whatever symptom you're trying to deal with.
Yeah. So a couple things to touch on what you just said. The story about the woman, like just being aware, like that it was the first time she'd laughed in so long. Well, just this morning, I had seen something that said, we know stress, anxiety, thinking bad things, all of these things lead to disease. We know that, right? And so laughter and joy, it stands to reason, would do the opposite. It's like a path out of disease. It's one of the ways out, right? But it's just all so connected. And I would encourage our listeners, I'm going to have to link this in the show notes as well, to go and listen to episode 140 that we did. And it's all about homeopathy with that homeopath. On Instagram, she's at that homeopath. Melissa is her name. And we talked a lot about homeopathy and contrasted it with how pharmaceuticals work, which is typically through suppression of symptoms. That these symptoms are like our body's messengers saying like, hey, something's not right here, right? So pharmaceuticals suppress those messengers. And then we talked a lot about how there were homeopathic hospitals that were kind of just like shut down, and doctors were told like they couldn't be associated with homeopathy in any way, shape, or form, or they would lose their license. And we talked about how those homeopathic hospitals disappeared and homeopathy just kind of fell off the grid, right? And what homeopathy does is it doesn't seek to suppress, but to support your body through what it's going through. And this is not an episode about homeopathy. I'm just saying that all of this is so connected. The fact that we shut down things that support your body in these natural processes, like Rita, like what you said, grief was a very natural reaction to what you were going through. You didn't need to suppress that, because that actually would probably cause disease. It would congest all of that within you. It wouldn't be able to be released. It would be stuck inside of you, just masked, right? And it doesn't actually make any sense. So what our bodies need is not that suppression. Our bodies and our spirit really just need support, right? Something I love about all of the sponsors that we've worked with is that they all share our values. Pure Annata is no exception. I love that this company was created by a homeschool mom over 20 years ago who has grown this incredible family business. She started it because she became aware of all the toxins in personal care products, and she wanted a healthier alternative for her family. If you guys are new to thinking about that, it is something that's so important. In conventional products, there are parabens, phthalates, false fragrances, all sorts of microplastics and things that can completely disrupt our hormonal system, our endocrine system. So it's extremely important to find healthier alternatives. Pure Annata is exactly that. They have such a wide range of cosmetics and skincare that truly work extremely well. And the best part about it, well, I don't know if it's the best part because there's so much that's great about them, but something that's really fantastic is that they're 100% natural while still being affordable. And that is a really rare thing. And I think that's, it really speaks to their integrity as well. And another excellent thing is that they offer free shipping on all orders over $75 within Canada and the United States, which is absolutely amazing. So be sure to check them out, pureannata.ca. You will not be disappointed.
Moving on to products, something I've noticed is you don't say like this vaccine or this medication. You call them products, or maybe you say vaccines and medications sometimes, but I most notably hear you say products. And I think that this is smart to do. And can you explain that if there's a reason? Maybe there's not a reason, but I see a reason for it.
I love that you picked up on that. So originally it was just a way of avoiding being censored because I refuse to use messed up spelling or emojis or anything like that when talking about vaccines. I think I understand why people do it. And I do think that there is definitely some valid reasons for doing it. I just don't want to do it. I don't think I should have to do it. I think I should be able to have an open and respectful conversation about vaccines. And I personally, when I see someone changing the spelling of a vaccine or anything like that, for some reason, it just makes you seem just a little kooky. And I know that that's not kooky. I know that it's important, but and that's maybe more my personal thing.
I'm just laughing because my spelling on Instagram for like 2 years was, I call them shots, but I put an asterisk where the I or the O would go and people thought it was an I. So they was calling him COVID.
Oh my gosh.
On purpose. I just thought it was like humorous.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Oh, that's hilarious. I'm going to call him now from that. I think of that every night now. So originally it was to avoid being censored. But then as I was going in that path, I was like, but this is true. It's a medical product. And I shared in our last conversation, I did not realize that vaccines were not a government product. I thought that it was something that the government made. And then, because maybe that was because I was growing up in the military, that was something that I maybe associated with the government because there was something that was required that you just did. So for me, when I started calling it products, I started noticing that like the philanthropic veil of vaccines started to be unmasked and started to fall a little bit when I called them medical products. And really, it's kind of more of our culture. Like if you look into our culture and you watch any kind of movie, most of the time, if there's some kind of disease or something like that, the hero is the person that finds the pill or the injection to save the world. And then on the flip side of that, the enemy is the money-hungry person that is withholding a pill or an injection from society. And So it makes you feel as a consumer, aka patients and parents, that products are something that we get to use because we have access to it. So when you call it a product, it's more of like a toothbrush or a car or anything else that you need to research, instead of being something like, oh, okay, well, I have access to it and I should be grateful to have it because it's this philanthropic thing that I can partake in. So by calling it products, I wasn't censored as much, and it also kind of put them in the place that they should be. They are products. Healthcare is a service. My degree is in business. And so, you either sell a service or a product. And when you go to a doctor, a pediatrician or a doctor or anything, when you are receiving a diagnosis and you are recommended a treatment, that is a service. You're paying for his expert advice to provide you a service. And if you fill out a prescription, you accept an injection, you are purchasing a product. You might be doing it through your insurance, but that's still something that you are procuring from that person. So once I put it into that perspective, then it kind of gave some patients that felt like they were below the medical community freedom to research the products. Like they felt like they were now able, oh, okay, well, I'm just being a educated consumer now.
Yeah. Okay. Staying on that line, you said this earlier, quoted yourself back, but in the last episode, it was just so powerful. You said the government knows, the manufacturer knows, but the parents don't know. And I would add that often the doctors don't know either. And so just no degree automatically qualifies you to be an expert on something. I guess if you're wearing the white coat and you have the title doctor, people think that you know, but that's not what makes you know about these products. Most of them are just going with what the 3-letter organizations say. Mm-hmm. So I think you would agree with that because you're nodding. But how do you find someone that you trust then? How do you find a doctor that actually does the research? Because you said you were betrayed, and that you paid a lot of money to these people, but paying a lot of money to these people doesn't automatically assume trust. That's not what gives you trust with your physician.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said that you added the doctors, because when I first started Just the Inserts, I received a lot of heated messages from medical students. And now I would say it's a complete 180. Most of the
students.
Yeah, medical students. Okay. And I love talking with them because I was able to point them to the inserts right when they're in medical school. And I love that. Yeah. I love it. I think it's great. I love healthy discourse. I love having respectful, open conversation. And I appreciated that. And now I have medical students that message me and they tell me about how they have conversations with their professors or with, someone that they experience at clinics or anything like that. And I think that's great. It gives me so much hope that there are medical students that are realizing that there's an issue and they're taking the onus to change that and to become, and I tell every single one of them, you are going to be a blessing to your patients. The fact that you understand and respect informed consent and that you already have the skills to access this information is amazing. They will be pivotal for every patient that they come across. I actually wrote a chapter in my book called How to Find Providers That Value Informed Consent. And I go step by step on how I personally found a quality medical team. I include ways to vet websites. I include some phone scripts to help before accepting or before scheduling an appointment. I kind of really weed out that in the book, and it's definitely doable. I will say up front, it will not be easy. You might have to drive a little farther. You might have to be a little bit more lenient in your schedule. You most likely will not find someone 15 minutes in your hometown. You're going to have to put in a little legwork. So if you do want that and that's something that you value, just know that up front. And then once you know that up front, then you can find what works for you. And I will say too, and I said this in the book, don't ever stop. Don't ever settle for healthcare. There are some providers that I found for my family that are wonderful, but they were an hour away, and it ended up causing a lot of strife and logistical nightmares for my family. So I kept looking, and it took me a few years, but now I have an amazing medical team that is within a 15-minute radius of my home because I never stopped. So I would encourage, even if you have found someone, but if it causes you stress and anxiety in other parts of your life, don't stop looking. Keep going. Never settle.
Very good. Very good. I think things are maybe getting a little easier from that standpoint. Like
Really?
people, I don't know. I didn't really think about like medical students kind of waking up to this, but that's so encouraging because I feel like a lot of us that were pro-informed consent got weeded out during 2020. And so it's good that there's a new crop coming in.
Well,
Yes.
and
100%.
I think this is how Canada is a little bit different than the US, because there might be Canadians listening to this thinking like, I can't even find a doctor that's terrible, let alone a good medical team. You know what I mean? Like, it's just impossible. Like, if my kids were to get sick and it was like an acute issue, I wouldn't even bother phoning my family doctor because they'd be like, oh, we can see you in like 4 weeks. You better go to a walk-in clinic, which we'll be lucky to find one that's open, or, you know, or take them to the emergency room. I don't even bother. And
so what do you do?
Well, we do our best to stay healthy. We have a homeopathic first aid kit. We have like otoscope and thermometers and everything we need at home to handle as much of it as we can ourselves. And part of me, I'm always so worried that I sound like I'm exaggerating, but this is not an exaggeration.
No.
Like there's
Wow.
no way to build your medical team in Canada. You're lucky.
Wow.
You're
That's
lucky.
scary.
You are more than lucky if you have an excellent doctor. You're lucky if you have a doctor just in name. Like
Wow.
it's a completely different concept here. And it's only getting worse.
Just so everybody knows, it's socialized medicine, okay, people?
Yeah.
So, like, please don't say that healthcare is a right and the government should provide it. Like, this is not what we want. Just gonna go out there and say that. Like, it is not what you want. And Cecily, it's not an exaggeration. I took, like, when I worked in the ICU, and, you know, we had scheduled open heart cases. I took care of more than one Canadian patient who went on a vacation and had their chest pain in the United States, like in an area where they picked out a hospital.
Vacation.
Like, I'm not joking, because if you're in an emergent situation or like urgent even, they could just have their surgery here.
Mm.
And don't get me wrong,
I had no idea.
There's cases where like someone will get sick or have a horrible thing happen, and you hear wonderful stories of the care they received. Like you do, like sometimes it happens, but it's just when we're talking about like the intentional, like I'm going to find a good medical team and we're going to have a plan for like when and if somebody gets sick. It's more just like you kind of feel like you're on your own. And I have a friend that came from Ukraine, and she, I don't know what it's like in Ukraine. We haven't really talked about Ukraine's system, but we talk about Canada's system. She feels so like she doesn't know how to get the care she needs here in Canada, which is crazy. You would think it would be easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she went home to Ukraine this summer and she loaded her schedule there with just as many appointments as she could handle while she was there because she knew how to get what she needed. Whereas here, it's a complete nightmare.
Wow, I had no clue. I'm so sorry. That's got to be very stressful.
Well, I mean, if it's what you know, you get used to it. But it's just when I hear Rita say, like, I think it's getting better, or maybe it was you, I forget who it was. I'm like, really?
That was me. I'm sorry. I apologize.
And I'm just like,
I was rubbing it in your face or something.
And I'm just sitting here like, really? Because here it's getting a lot worse.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, I would agree it is getting a little bit better in the U.S., but
I shouldn't say like better within the hospital system itself, but better where there's more like
people
outlying providers.
Yeah. And I hope that's true here. And what's really growing here also is just like paramedical, like naturopathic doctors and all of that. And it's different for Canadians to have to wrap their mind around, like, if I want to see a naturopath, I'm going to have to pay them, you know, and maybe my extended medical coverage through work or something will pay part of it. But it's different for a Canadian to have to wrap their head around the fact that their taxes didn't already pay for that. You know?
Well, so we have to pay out of pocket as well.
Okay.
My insurance does not cover our healthcare
Which
at all.
Yeah. And see, but Canadians they think that's a foreign concept, right? So they're like a little bit more hesitant to go see a naturopath because they have to pay something. Whereas, you know, they've already paid for the doctor.
Right.
But they're paying for the doctor that they can't actually go see through their taxes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's like paying for public school, but you homeschool.
Doing that too.
Yeah. Yep. That's a great analogy. Okay. So when it comes to babies and adults, for the most part, you say that we get the same product. So let's just highlight that a little bit. And is there anything else you have to add there?
So when I was talking about that, I was talking about like there are certain dosage recommendations. So there are differences for that. However, when you get most products, the ingredients will be the same. So I had a few people message me that were actually, they pointed out premature infants also get a lot of the same products that a healthy 10-pound baby or, 9-pound baby would get. And, oh my gosh, some of the stories, I don't know if you guys caught when I was actually talking about order sets, which Brita, I have to thank to you because you're the nurse that mentioned order sets to me. And it opened up this huge conversation in my DMs. And I posted some of them. Like, I want people to know that if they follow me on Instagram, I only share things in my story when I receive permission from people to share them, and I will always crop the photo and username from it. And because of that, most of what I share is a small percentage of what I get in my DMs. So that conversation was huge. I was on my phone constantly just from nurses messaging me about order sets. And a lot of them had to do with premature infants and infants in the NICU. And a lot of them, what we're saying is there was no difference. The baby that comes out has an incredible birth experience, no drugs or anything like that, getting a vitamin K, getting the Hep B, getting the eye ointment. The same NICU baby is getting the same thing, and there's no distinguish between them on the ingredients. So it stands to reason that the same adverse reactions that a healthy baby would be concerned about are the same adverse reactions that a NICU or, preemie baby would be worried about. And to me, that's baffling. That's baffling to me when you have an infant that is in the NICU for some reason, you're adding on all of these interventions on top of what they're already dealing with. And I was actually going to ask you, I know this might be a little off topic, but some of the L&D nurses, the labor and delivery nurses, were messaging me and saying that they were terrified when a baby was going into the NICU, because if a family declined certain products in labor and delivery, they weren't aware that they also had to decline them in the NICU. Oh, wow. And so parents were thinking that if they declined a product that it would translate or transfer over to the NICU, but they weren't really realizing they had to again say it in the NICU. Did you ever experience that? Or
well, I just always tell people you need to be constantly communicating with whoever your care team is. Like, it doesn't even transfer sometimes within the same unit to the next nurse on the next shift. Yeah. So like, this is why I'm such a huge proponent. And I know some nurses hate me for this, but like having family present is hard as a nurse. I get it, you guys, like having family present all the time, because sometimes it makes it hard to do your job if there's constant questions. Like, you just need to tell them, like, just a moment, like, I'm assessing your child or your loved one right now, or whatever, if you need that moment. But people being present with their loved one is so important, especially for informed consent to happen in a situation where it's either a child or an adult who is intubated and sedated and cannot speak for themselves. Because this is what happens. The order sets and best practices are two things. And I'm sorry, is this okay? It's your interview, but I'm going to go off on this tangent.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. I'm here for it.
All right. So order sets are one thing where it doesn't matter where you're being admitted to. If you're admitted to the ICU, if you're admitted to like the PEDS unit, the NICU, post-op open heart patient, there's an order set for that. So say post-op open heart is where I work. Like this order set, the surgeon would pull up the order set, and it's not like they click the orders they want. It's like 100 orders of everything a normal open heart would get afterwards. And those are all there going onto the chart unless they uncheck the order. So they don't even check the orders they want. They have to uncheck something that they wouldn't want. And this can be anything from like how often your blood pressure is monitored to the IV medications that are available and PRN or as needed medications the nurse might want to give. That's one thing. And so with an adult, you typically don't have vaccines on that. But with a baby going into the NICU, like the vitamin K, the Hep B, all of those things that are normal at birth and probably now RSV are potentially on there. Okay. So parents need to be aware. The other thing is best practice. When patients are admitted to the hospital, there's an admission navigator or admission form questionnaire where it's like asking you everything from your religious beliefs, and we can, whether or not they care about those, I don't know, but religious beliefs to what belongings you have with you, if you have any money with you, to have you had your flu vaccine, have you had your pneumonia vaccine, depending on what age you are. And I'm guessing that COVID vaccines are on the docket now too with that. And if you say no, it will ask if you wish to receive that. And sometimes that's just brushed over. So a lot of times if patients have not had those yet, depending on the time of year, it will flag an order to go to the pharmacy. The pharmacist automatically puts this on the medication administration record, and the medication or vaccine automatically gets sent up to be given. So oftentimes this doesn't even necessarily go through the doctor. And so, for example, our open heart patients, we're not supposed to have flu vaccines or pneumonia vaccines within so many hours after surgery. And that wasn't always known. And occasionally they would get sent up. And depending on nurses, ties to being consistent with informed consent, a sedated, intubated patient could get the flu vaccine or the pneumonia vaccine immediately after their open heart surgery without ever knowing it.
It's crazy.
That is bonkers to me.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that when you and I were discussing this, from a business perspective, it's genius. It makes a lot of sense. I could see that being very effective. I could see that causing a lot of streamline of therapies, and I understand the thought process behind it, but it's terrifying from an informed consent performative.
But a lot of these doctors and nurses don't even I know as a person who is pro informed consent, who has their own opinions about these products and things, I can see why people might think that these are bad people, doing just trying to get money for the pharmaceutical industry and stuff like that. But these doctors in the ICU don't really have any ties to that necessarily. And the nurses don't either, but they really just have it hammered into them that this is the way to go. And they're doing patients a favor. And honestly, a lot of them don't even have any idea, one, the reactions that could happen. They don't even, they're sold with they're so sold to us that nothing can ever happen from these. Watch for the reactions from the blood transfusion. Watch for the reactions when you give this medication that could cause a problem, but vaccines don't have any kind of side effect. That's how they're sold, and people just eat it up.
Yeah. And that's why when I get messages on the other end that are heated of, why are you so kind to medical professionals? Well, because they're only taught what they're taught. They're only doing their training. How can you expect someone to do something in their professional career or, in the professional skills if they weren't taught that? And that's why I addressed in the book, if you are a medical professional going outside your traditional training to read more about informed consent, I applaud you. That is amazing for you to do that, because you're going outside of what you had been trained for all of your years in school and in your professional experience. You're not being taught this either. The CDC trainings aren't teaching this to you either. I know, because I've taken them. So I think it's great. Why wouldn't we want medical professionals wanting that? And I get messages from other people saying that they left the medical industry because of what you just described. Seeing their peers be on autopilot and give something to a patient knowing that that could potentially, they could be at a higher risk for a potential adverse reaction, or knowing that they didn't want that, but they gave it anyway. That's going to be so hard to be in a workplace like that. I don't envy them at all. And so I want to support them, and I want to help them be better advocates for their patients and for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And just when you said, why are you so kind to medical professionals or whatever, you know, and people asking you that, I was looking around to see if my Bible was laying close. It's clear over there. But it makes me think of like where it talks about, you know, not everyone is aware of the same things you are aware of, you know, and we have to treat people accordingly. And remember when we were once unable to see the truth, you know, and I know that that's talking about Christ, right? But the same applies to how we treat people on other aspects of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Because I shared before, I was emotionally ignited about the vaccine conversation, and I had no idea what they were. And so I've got to have the grace too when I talk with people. And I know, man, I mess up. I'm a human. Like there are some people that I talk to and I'm like, oh, they're so far gone. Like you have no idea what you're talking about. I try I try to pull myself back before I get that deep, but you know, I think it. Of course, I think that like the woman that you shared earlier, when I saw that, I actually had pity for her, because I was like, oh, come on, like the research is out there. How are you not seeing this? But then I remember what I used to do and how I used to think. And so it's definitely kind of looking into a mirror sometimes when I experience that.
Speaking of that, you talked about in the last episode that we did with you about your mom verbally vomiting to you about, I can't remember which one it was, that you asked her, because your mom's a researcher. Yeah. So your mom's a researcher, and you asked her to research that for you. And then she like, quote, verbally vomited. You said all the information, and it made your relationship very hard. But how has that changed? Like that experience, how has that changed how you approach now just the inserts and informing others?
Yeah, definitely. A few people messaged and they were like, "Your poor mom." Now, I do agree. I was very hard on her. However, I think it's incredibly important to note that if you are shaming or forcing or judging or anyone like that in that mindset for someone not to accept a medical product, that's still medical coercion. And I understand the intent behind it, and my mom had the best intentions, but boundaries were crossed. And so it helped me realize to not do that to other people, because I know what it felt like, especially because my mom and I were so close. And my mom's watching my kids right now. They're in the basement watching a movie. She's watching my kids. So obviously our relationship has been healed. But at the same time, it made me turn off to the whole conversation of what she was saying. And my friend has this saying, she says, her message was lost in her mess. And it was so aggressive and heated that I couldn't listen to anything she was saying. Any of the research didn't mean anything to me, because it was just very forceful. And I even said that in the book, like if I give tips on how to have productive conversations about pharmaceuticals. And if you're in your doctor's office with a printed insert and you're pointing at the insert and yelling at your medical provider, that's probably not going to be a productive conversation. And so understanding that you're going to get farther with honey than vinegar, and to keep that in mind, you wouldn't want them treating you that way. And so you want to come at it with love and having a soft heart.
Yeah.
And yeah, 100%.
Maybe I'm about to clarify something that's super clear to everyone, but I just want to make sure it's super clear. If you haven't listened to our previous episode with just the inserts, or if you don't know her history, you were, I don't know if I can even say pro-vaccine, but you were more pro-vaccine than you obviously are now. And your mom was trying to stop you from giving your child a certain vaccine, and it created quite a rift in your relationship.
Yeah. I thought vaccines were great, a gift to humanity. And, I thought that it reversed or stopped a lot of deadly diseases. It's so funny, because I thought all the things, even in my book and in my training course, I will put in quotes of like, well, vaccines save lives and vaccines don't cause the inserts. And then I address all of those things. And I feel comfortable putting those quotes because those are words that I have uttered. Those are things that I have said. So I feel comfortable putting those in there because I've said those things and I was wrong. I was clearly misinformed. And it took me having to research and go to .gov resources. And I actually sometimes forget to mention to people that I have .gov resources and it's not just hearsay. But there was one woman that messaged me. She said, I was going back and forth. I knew intuitively that I didn't want some products for my baby. I was pregnant and I was having a hard time with my partner. And he was saying that he only wanted to hear from .gov resources. She happened to talk with a friend and a friend was like, oh, we'll show him just the inserts. And he read I think he took my training course, or I know that he spent a lot of time with it. And then after that, it was fine. He was totally on board. And so I was happy to hear that that was like what he needed, because that's what I needed. And that kind of what differentiates me from some other resources is that these are all things that our government is saying. So hopefully you could consider that credible information.
I appreciate that about you so much. And I think that's why I feel so just like, I don't know, close to what you do is just like, that's what I want for people. I want people to be able to do their own research on any topic, medication or otherwise, and come up with their own conclusions, go straight to the source. We talk about this all the time. It's the best thing to do. But something you said there was, telling somebody not to take a product and giving them all the reasons why they shouldn't is also medical coercion. And I think that a lot of people who were against the COVID vaccine forgot that. Because I would get messages from people like, I literally lost my job. Okay. I lost my job not taking the vaccine. And people forget that a few years later and they'll message me like, you're like being too easy on this, or you're not taking this seriously enough. I'm like, no, I'm taking this very seriously. And I take your freedom very seriously. Okay. And so do you remember this, Cecily?
Oh, yeah.
We did an episode. There was a legislation. Was it in Arizona or?
I don't remember in that detail.
Arizona.
No.
Couldn't have been Arizona. I can't remember, but there was legislation in a state to make it a felony, I believe, to give anyone a COVID vaccine. Yeah. It was a conservative state. I can't remember, but basically they were saying like, these products are on the market, but you are not allowed to give them. And if you're a doctor or a nurse helping a doctor give a vaccine that is mRNA, you can like, it'll be felony status. And I had put a poll in my stories to see what people thought of it. I'm like, do you think this is good or bad or like not sure? And I'm pretty sure there was more, I think this is good than bad. And if it wasn't more, it was very close, but I'm pretty sure more good. And I'm like, just shocked because this is the same thing. This product is on the market, and whether or not you think it is good or bad, people are free to make their choice. And I think that it's important for people to see that.
Right. Because I try for things like that, especially when it's in legislation, that product can be replaced with any product. And so do you want to set that precedent? Do you want that to be the precedent for what if there is a pharmaceutical that is great and something that's helpful and something that you need? You wouldn't want that. It's like I said before, I would never want someone to accept or delay or decline a product because I didn't want them to have it. Yeah. I want them to have the onus. I want them to exercise their authority to be able to make that decision for themselves, because they're the ones that are going to have to deal with, if they do get to the disease, they're the ones that are going to have to deal with being alert to the symptoms, preventing complications, preventing spread for the community, all of that stuff. They're responsible for that. And on the flip side, they're responsible if they do accept that medication for any adverse reactions, or if they shed on to anybody else as well. So if you're just going into it of, no, you can't have it because I said so, that's not healthy. I don't like that either.
Which brings us to relationship, between responsibility and authority, right?
Yeah. 100%. I have a whole book on this, or a whole chapter of this in the book. And if for those that don't know, it's incredibly important to understand if you were responsible for something, you automatically have the authority to make that decision. Really in anything in life, but especially for medical products. If you're responsible for potential adverse reaction, death for you or your child, you have the authority. not your doctor, not me, not Rita, not Cecily, not anyone on Instagram, no unbiased self-proclaimed science podcast or Instagram account or anything like that. They are not your authority. I know they might seem like they're your authority, but they're not. You are the authority. And I think that's an incredibly important part to realize before you even start getting into the informed consent world. Because if you don't understand that, then informed consent isn't going to make a whole lot of sense for you.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So when it comes to vaccine reactions, or somebody saying like, I was harmed by this vaccine, or a mother saying their child was harmed, it seems like people who trust in these things often, or haven't researched enough to know that there could be reactions, get very offended. What would you say is a rationale for that? Like, why do you think people take so much offense, but they're not offended like when somebody has a reaction to blood pressure medication or something?
I think this goes back to our culture and how we perceive vaccines, just like that it's like when we talk about going to third world countries or something, we're like, and we're bringing vaccines. Like you're providing a charity by providing that. And when you just said that, it reminded me, I had come across this one, a young woman. She took the COVID vaccine and she had been sharing her experience. She was diagnosed with, I want to say like 2 to 3 autoimmune diseases. And she's just sharing the fact that she now is diagnosed with these autoimmune diseases and that it is known to be caused by the COVID vaccine. And she shared some of the comments. You know how you can like respond to a comment? I believe it was on TikTok, and then she shared it onto Instagram. And there were so many people that were gaslighting her, telling her that she was fear-mongering. Again, she's just sharing her personal experience. And all of these people came at her. And the one that hit me the most and made me the most sad are the people that were saying she took one for the greater good. And that to me is just so insensitive to say that like, good for you that you got this autoimmune disease because you were taking one for the greater good. You were providing herd immunity, and especially everything we know about the COVID vaccines and the fact that they don't even prevent the spread. They just limit the symptoms. And if you look like I'm on X now, and so I followed all of like the CDC, FDA, all of these NIH, all of these Twitter accounts or X accounts, whatever they're called now. And when they just did their post for the COVID vaccine saying to go get it, even their wordage, like even for their verbiage, when you read it, it says, get a COVID-19 vaccine to prevent severe complications from COVID-19. Not that you won't get COVID-19 or not that you won't spread it to other people, but just to prevent severe complications.
Yep. And this was my argument to the director of nursing the day I got walked out of the hospital. Like, they're literally like, but you got to protect other people. I'm like, no, this does not make any kind of sense whatsoever. And everybody after the fact is like, well, we didn't know that at the time. Now we do. I'm like, if you looked at how this vaccine was manufactured, how it was to function in the body, anybody who understands anything medical should have been able to figure this out. You didn't want to figure it out. You wanted to push it upon people. Yeah.
Well, and you wanted to protect your belief system.
Yeah.
We love to cling to those, right?
Yeah. And then when my ex-manager posts her positive COVID test, like, a couple months later after I'm off the job, I just like, are you kidding me, people? Like,
yeah. I don't really talk about COVID as much on Instagram just because of the whole censorship thing. And honestly, and I'm just being very frank, it's very raw to me. And I think I have a little bit of PTSD about everything that happened around COVID. I was pregnant with my son, and I'm actually very grateful I got deleted because it was affecting my blood pressure and it was affecting my mental health. Seeing all of this on .gov websites and sharing it, and then still seeing people accept it without being informed or accept it for false pretenses or reasons that were easily invalid by .gov information. It broke my heart, and I couldn't handle seeing it anymore. And just the messages that were flooding in of the died suddenly. I got that constantly. That phrase, died suddenly, was in my inbox so often. And the one that broke me the most was a dad had to get it because of work, because of the federal mandate. He went upstairs to draw a bath for his 2 little girls, and he had a heart attack and died in front of them. And it just breaks my heart, because that could have been avoided if he would have exercised the authority that he had over his body, and that would have been respected. And I say this in the book, a society that values informed consent will not have mandates, because if you're operating under a mandate, you're operating over somebody else having authority over your body. And that is not informed consent.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I say everyone's welcome in the informed consent community, whether you accept, delay, or decline, because we all need to understand and respect it for other people. You don't know if somebody has a contraindication that they're not telling you. You don't know if there's a family history of some other thing that would make them higher risk for accepting a medical product. We need to be able to respect other people's decisions and not put that mandate on them, because maybe he was at risk for a heart issue or cardiovascular issue, but he had to choose between putting food on the table for his children or accepting this product, and it ended up costing him his life. And I feel like so many of those things would have been prevented if we were a society that valued informed consent.
It absolutely would be. And nobody even did a risk benefit analysis on any of this. There was none. And like, you start talking about that, and I feel a lump in my throat getting emotional, because, you know, like Cecily and I talked about this based on another circumstance that she was dealing with a while back. She's like, maybe this isn't even a big deal. And I'm like, no, it is a big deal. And then I related it back to what happened during COVID with me. Like, I lost my job, or didn't know if I lost my job. They said, you're not welcome here right now. We'll figure this out. And walked out after taking care of a VA ECMO patient at like 10 o'clock in the morning. And then 6 weeks later, I'm in that same hospital, still not really sure where I'm at with that hospital, delivering my baby that was already gone. And you said PTSD, like, I am very slow to call anything trauma, but that was a traumatic experience. And sometimes, like, I think about it and I'm like, what? Like, I just kind of blew things out of proportion. But no, like, it was awful. It was horrible. And still during this whole time, it's 2021 and everybody's getting sick from COVID and the hospitals aren't helping them. They're like, go home and come back when you can't breathe. And the whole time before that, I'm trying to get them to help treat these people with something, you know, before they're that sick. And so my phone's blowing up, literally triaging and helping my friends and telling them what to do by my own protocol. And that, Corey Pierre, his website, like using that to help them and finding doctors in their local area that are naturopaths that will help them. Like, that was my 2021. And so I don't know, my whole point is, like, these things were traumatic. And it was all done on purpose, I think. Absolutely on purpose.
Well, and I gave this example early on in my Instagram. So if someone's been following me for a while, they'll remember this. When the vaccines were first being talked about, like, they weren't even on the market yet, but they were already starting censoring like anything to do with COVID, anything to do with the vaccines. And you couldn't even like look up some hashtags that were like injection or vaccine or COVID or anything like that. The reasoning is that they would direct you to Gavi, what is that, Bill Gates Foundation, or the World Health Organization, or the CDC. So then I went onto the CDC website and pulled, like, what is the number one cause of death in America? And it was like heart disease. And then I pulled from the CDC website a screenshot of saying, what are the things that contribute to heart disease? And one of the things was fatty foods and alcohol and cigarettes. So then I went to Instagram and I looked up hashtags for fatty foods or like e-cigarettes or like some alcohol or something like that. There was no censorship whatsoever for the things that the CDC says can contribute to the number one cause of death in America. Yet there was no censorship about that health concern.
Absolutely. I remember making a post because, you know, I worked in a cardiac ICU and I had my annual test about like all the causes of heart disease. And like is very scary. Like, this is the number one killer. These are the causes, yada, yada. And I had made a post like, FYI, heart disease is still the number one, killer in America.
Right.
And it's just like, but it didn't look that way at the time.
Right. Because the reason why I said that is because it really wasn't about health, in my opinion.
No,
because if it was about health, then all of that would have been censored too.
It wasn't. And you think about, okay, I'll get off the COVID soapbox in a second, but you think about like, I had coworkers telling me I was discriminating against the obese because at the beginning of 2020, I had talked about this throughout. Like, so this has lasted years, right? At this point, going into 2022. And I talked about like getting healthy, that most of the patients I'm seeing are smokers or diabetic or morbidly obese. So like, do these things to help yourself. And they're like going, you're discriminating against people who are obese. I'm like, no, I love everyone and I want them to have every tool at their disposal and not to lie to them and tell them it's affecting everyone equally. They need to know they are the most at risk. And for some reason, like, people just wanted to attack me for that. But then you see the Paxlovid commercial for Pfizer's medication that you take early, the antiviral or whatever. And it's like, people who are most at risk that should seek out this medication, obese, diabetic, da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, it's all right when the drug company says it, but not when you're just trying to help someone without the drug attached to it.
Right. And it's actually just reminded me of a memory. Someone had messaged me shortly after I did all of that. And she said, I was so afraid of COVID. I was so afraid. She was like, I was one of the first people to wear a mask, and I double masked way before anybody double masked. But then when I saw your stories, I realized that I was obese, drinking heavily, and smoking. And she realized all of those things were making her more at risk, way more than not wearing a mask in public. And so she took the onus. She became responsible and took her authority, and she changed her lifestyle. She dropped like 40 pounds. And she's like, I've never been this happy. I've been overweight my whole life. And I was like, yes, thank you. That's awesome. That's exactly what you should do.
How great is that? Like, I have a couple followers who, took it upon themselves. Instead of taking offense, they took action. And I mean, that's so empowering.
Yeah. And I understand. I've struggled with my weight my whole life. I get it. Especially having babies, especially breastfeeding, my body holds on to weight like nothing else. So I understand how hard that can be. And I understand how quick it is to be emotional and to feel, that the person that is saying something like that would be attacking you as a person because you yourself are overweight, but you have to separate it. You have to realize that being overweight and obese does predispose you to certain diseases. And this is all .gov information. This is all on the internet. And again, like I said, just being responsible for your body and being responsible for your children's body and realizing that these are things that you're at risk for, and not automatically relying on a pill or injection to save you, and taking that on yourself and being responsible. Because, and a lot of people will, and I know I'm getting on a weird tangent here, but a lot of people will bring up, I'm not rich enough to do that. Get outside, walk outside. Like, there are so many things that are way better and more are free for you to do than paying for a gym membership. So there are things that you can do within your lifestyle to at least help a little bit.
Yeah, I want to give just a little encouragement about the weight situation, because somebody might be listening to this and think, well, like, I'm overweight, it's really hard, but I don't think it's so much the obesity as the lifestyle choices that lead to obesity, because some people just are predisposed with a different body habitus than other people. But the problem with obesity is the inflammatory process and the condition that your body is experiencing inside, always trying to fight. Like, that's the problem with somebody who's obese and diabetic. When they come to the ICU, they're sick with this other thing. They're in this inflammatory cascade, but they were already in it. Their body was already fighting prior to that condition. And so sometimes you might be a little bit overweight or something, but you're treating your body really well, and you don't necessarily have all that underlying inflammation because you're making lifestyle choices that are healthy.
Yeah, that's excellent. That was a great point. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I don't even know where to go from here. I don't know. Anything else you want to discuss? I guess when we're talking about 2020, maybe the impact that 2020 had on opening the eyes of people. And I think it's the one unintended consequence the government did not foresee is people waking up to the vaccine schedule potentially and the medical system that we have.
Yeah, it definitely did. And I'm glad that I started researching in 2019 because I saw what it was like before all of this happened. And now I see how it is now. And even though 2020 and 2021, that was like psychological warfare enduring all of that, but I am grateful for it. And I think that is perfect of like what man intends for bad, God will turn for good. I'm totally misquoting that scripture, but that's the general gist of it. There are so many good things that came out of it. And I almost feel like everything that's going on with, I mean, we had a presidential candidate make that a main part of his platform was discussing the pharmaceutical industry. And whether you agree with him or not on everything else, that's still pretty impressive that we had that be the forefront of a political campaign. So when that happened, I don't know, part of me kind of felt like I could relax a little bit, and maybe that's a false sense of security, but it was so reassuring to me to see that because we fought for so hard for so long to just have our voices be heard on Instagram and for research to be shared, that it was just really encouraging to see that. And it's really encouraging to be in the grocery store line and hear people have conversations about things and not get heated and upset and spewing all these hateful words, that we are having more of a respectful conversation. Now, there are people that don't, but for me, at least from my perspective, walking out my front door, getting off of the internet, seeing the face-to-face conversations, I personally see a huge improvement since before COVID.
Yep. Cecily, I've been talking a ton.
It's funny because that's great. I love what you've had to say. And I was just apologizing to Rita the other day for how much I talked in an episode that recently released. And it's just sometimes we just get passionate. And honestly, me being quiet is not a lack of passion. It's just, honestly, there's so much in me that's just processing. And also realizing that maybe I do have some resentment and some anger that I didn't even realize that I was holding on to from those years. That, I don't know, you kind of experience it in a new way when you're talking about it after it's happened. And it makes you realize some things. And so I've just kind of been quietly sitting here listening to you guys and just having a little talk with myself about like, you didn't realize you were feeling this way. What are you going to do about that now? You know? Because I had so many instincts to start talking about, like, honestly, how pissed off I am, I guess, and how horrible so much of what we all went through was. And I'm like, but that's really my anger about it that I didn't realize I still had is not going to help. You know, like there is so much good that did come of it. Like you said, God turned it to good, and there's still a long way to go. But yeah, there's a lot to ponder for me. And it's just amazing how you realize things about how you feel about things that already happened as you're sitting there listening to two other people hash it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's really great that you realize that, because so many times during that phase of our lives, we were just focused on getting to the next step and just trying to endure. And I think a lot of us were expecting more and more things to happen, like what's around the corner. And you're in that fight or flight mentality for so long. And then you get out of it, and then you get a glimpse of like normal life. And then you just want to savor that. And you kind of want to forget that part of your life, and you don't even want to talk about it. And that's honestly why I don't talk about COVID so much on Instagram, because it brings me back and it pulls me back into that space. But for me, sharing, being just very honest, like it'll seep out in other parts of my life. And so I think it's good to talk about it and say like, yeah, that was really hard. And that was I know I'm the same with you. I don't want to just throw the word trauma around, but that was really traumatic. And to have babies and to raise children, especially little children during that time period, that was hard. That was really something that I never dreamed of happening, but also I'm grateful because it made me so much stronger of a mother. And I'm now able to instill that strength into my children and to hopefully prepare them in case they ever have to experience anything like this.
Absolutely. You know, I was talking
huge. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was talking earlier about pharmaceuticals and suppression, right? And how I try not to use pharmaceuticals for suppression, but it's not only pharmaceuticals that suppress, right? Like I try so hard to suppress, like you said, you go through it and it's hard and you do it. And then you get back to normal life and you just carry on with normal life without realizing that you actually had all this stuff like suppressed. And when you were talking about your story with your mom, like it's so cool to me how you went through a really difficult time with her. And once it was over, you weren't just like, oh, it was fine. You know, like everything's fine. You still say there were boundaries that were crossed. And so again, I'm kind of getting off, but this is what was going through my mind, you guys. Like while I was quiet for a while, I'm just like, this is a conversation that we're having about vaccines and about Just the Inserts book. But there's just so much more to it, like on that deeply human, personal level that it's like, we're all affected by these things and there's different ways to suppress. And I'm very guilty of suppressing things in a non-pharmaceutical way, which leads to its own issues. So I've appreciated this conversation even from that unexpected avenue.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, I suppress in trying to control, I can't control COVID. I can't control my government. So I'm going to control my children. I'm going to control our schedule. I'm going to schedule out to the 15-minute degree, everything that goes on. And then if something goes off, then I, freak out. I completely agree with you. There are other ways that I've suppressed going through that and still to this day. And I think it's important. And I've said this before on Instagram. When I came back to Instagram after I was deleted and I was allowed to come back, I set very clear boundaries around that app. And I worked with my husband on making sure that if it was family time, I didn't have my phone anywhere around me because it was so easy for me to grab my phone and respond to someone needing an insert or something like that. And that's another reason why I did the training course, because I can't be around my phone all the time. There's a huge opportunity cost for me to be on my phone because that takes me away from my family. So yeah, I do agree with you 100% for how it comes out in other parts of our lives.
I know so many of us are looking for ways to keep our families healthy while avoiding the doctor's office. And one of the ways that Cecily and I have both found to do this is homeopathy. We have both benefited from homeopathy and specifically Remedy Collective. They have been one of the ways that we have learned to care for our family. It's helped us not only with their remedies, but also the learning process. We each have their first aid kit, and in that first aid kit comes a guide with a list of problems that describes what remedy to use for what problem. It's been so helpful to have on hand. So if you guys are interested in learning more about homeopathy, but also having remedies to keep on hand for you and your family, go to remedycollective.com/boomclappodcast and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 10% on your order. Okay, well, I very much appreciate this conversation. I don't know if there's anything else you have to add. We covered a lot of bases today, a lot of more of the nitty gritty side of just the inserts and the inserts themselves and products. So I don't know. Is there anything else you have to add other than please do tell people again your book title? And
yes. Well, before I do, so my husband, I said that I was coming on with you guys and he was like, well, didn't you already talk to them? And I said, yeah, well, we're still, we have other things to talk about. And now that we've talked, I'm like, but we still have more things to talk about.
I know, we can go on. Absolutely.
This could be like a 3-part series. I feel like
a therapy session here at the end.
I know. And maybe somebody listening is like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize the same was happening for me. Maybe you can address that for your own life. But yeah, so my book is called Well Considered, a handbook for making informed medical decisions. Another conversation, I could write a book about writing a book. I opted out of Amazon. So you cannot find it on Amazon. I could go into a long story about that, but basically, if Amazon disagrees or finds whatever your content to be harmful, they can still sell your book, but not give you royalties, or they can just pull it off. So I was not comfortable with the fine print of Amazon. So I ended up self-publishing. So you can only get it from justtheinserts.store. But if you go to justtheinserts.com, there's a very visible button at the top part of my website that says get my book. So you can also just go there.
That's great.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I need to hear more about that some other time.
Yeah, that's part 4.
Yeah. And it makes me really want to encourage people to go buy it because again, depth of character, Amazon's the easiest way to sell a book by far. So good for you for reading that insert essentially on the Amazon fine print and going your own way.
It was like $7,000 to make this book, but it's so worth it. And I'm so glad that it's here. And despite what we're told, the internet isn't forever. And so that's a big reason why I wanted to have it in print so people can have access to that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for having this conversation with us. I trust that it's going to be heard by a lot of people and it's going to make a difference in a lot of people's lives. Looking forward to continuing our relationship with you and most likely having you back on again in the future. You guys, next week, like we alluded to a couple times already in this episode, we're talking with Dr. Heidi Klessig about brain death. And if you liked this, you will love that as well. We know you will. They just go hand in hand together. So make sure that if you're not subscribed to the podcast or following it, click subscribe or follow, whatever it says on the app that you use to listen to podcasts, so that next week that episode will show up for you because you're not going to want to miss it. It's truly excellent. But yeah, thank you for listening. Don't forget to review. Like we said at the beginning, it just makes our day. If we see a new review in the morning, we're going to have a good day. So if you want to put that into our lives for us, we would super appreciate it. And if you want to follow us outside of the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at Boom Clap Podcast, or you can find me individually at cecily.dickey or my website, thegracetogrow.com.
And you can find me, Rita, at ritarogersco.com or Rita Rogers Co on Instagram. Thanks for listening.